Hi, this is Pierre Delacote working at Planet Technologies. What is the first question I have when we deploy a set of technology like Microsoft 365? It's probably when to use what. There are so many tools, so many overlaps, people are confused, they can do same things in different tools. So you might want to address this question early enough so people are not confused when you deploy the technology. So here is a framework I use. I think it's the best way so far I've identified how to position the when to use what answer. Um, might not be perfect depending on your context, but it might give you some ideas on how to frame this question. So first, what about the tools? So there are a lot of tools who have an overlap, and I don't put them all here. I'm going to talk about collaboration. So there are several ways to do it. OneDrive, Teams, and SharePoint. There's also Outlook, but I try to put Outlook out of the scope because Outlook to me is not made for collaboration. So OneDrive basically is for me. It's to store my information. Sometimes I can share this information, but I wouldn't recommend it, um, except for a few scenarios like between an exec assistant and or VIP or his VIP, um, to share, I don't know, for example, a OneNote notebook. But in general, it's your personal information, your personal documents, your personal files, your personal images. You can store them in OneDrive and have access to it wherever. Teams is about we. We as a team, we're going to work on a subject, we have a common interest, a common purpose. We're going to collaborate through chat within the team, through documents. We're going to co-author documents. So Teams is really a central piece, where you can do anything in a central one tool, one-stop shop where you can do everything. And SharePoint is, let's say, everyone's information. It's about us as an organization or as a department. I share a final document, for example. So there's a me, the we, and us. I think I'm not the author of that. Several people are sharing the same framework, but I think it's a good framework to start with. You can answer the when to use what question with a radical approach. I remember 15 years ago, something like that, there was a company called Atos, a big SI like Capgemini or EY or other Accenture. Atos, the president of Atos thought email was such a pain, that he had a strategy, radical strategy, saying zero email. So the goal was to collaborate outside of email. And there were a set of tools behind the scene, but you can have a radical approach too, um, not targeting the zero email, but you can say you can do everything in Teams. This can be possible. You can actually do everything in Teams. Some people might argue that there's some things you cannot do, but in fact, most of the organization I worked with, I can see they can do everything in Teams. It's a matter of governance and matter of how you allow people to create teams or not, but it could be a radical approach. But let's have a more uh, open approach. So what do I do with a document? A lot of time we talk about the tools, but the end user also try to understand how the tools are working, try to understand when to use what tools for what purpose. But when it comes to the daily workflow, so they're going to work on a document and they're going to have this question, what do I do with a document? Where should I start? How should I handle this document? Where should I store it? What should I do with the document? So this framework is trying to answer this question. When you work with files, one best practice, at least it's mine, is to say, okay, if you don't feel comfortable sharing right away your document, and you want to create a draft, be comfortable, not exposing yourself, then create the draft in OneDrive. Then you won't have to share it with everybody, and people won't see it, just you and maybe a few other people if you want to add some knowledge. But that's, a good way to start. You create a draft in OneDrive. And when you feel the draft can be shared and it's not a draft anymore, there's two possibilities here. Either you feel it's final, then you can store it in SharePoint Online, either in a departmental SharePoint site or in the global intranet. Or you feel enough comfortable to share it with other people so they can contribute, and then you need to collaborate on this document a little bit more, then you store it in Teams. You can also directly say this document is final, so you share it in SharePoint Online, or this document needs to be co-author. You need to collaborate. You don't need a draft because you feel comfortable working directly in Teams and expose yourself directly, though then you can store the document in Teams. So why to use OneDrive instead of Teams to start? So I'll give you a few examples I've seen with customers and with people, because it's also a matter of how people feel about it. The first one is I need to work on a personal document. So you don't want to share it in a team, obviously, neither in SharePoint. So you store it in OneDrive so you can have access to it from anywhere on any device, if you're allowed to. And you have a document that will be accessible even if your computer is crashing. Then you don't feel comfortable, so people will see your document, even if you want to collaborate after a while on this document. So that might be a reason to store it in OneDrive, working on a draft. And then you don't want people to see or edit it, so you store it in your personal OneDrive. And also sometimes you feel comfortable, but just with a few people that you feel, I don't know, comfortable to work with, or you feel they will bring value, get some value, so you can share your document store it in OneDrive, share it with these few people. So that's another reason why you can store your document in OneDrive that I have seen. And sometimes there are other people who are storing their document in OneDrive because OneDrive is just like Outlook. It's focused, it's a self-centric tool. So you organize your folder however you want. The structure is yours. It mimics your brain somehow. You store it with the taxonomy you want, with the folder organization you want. So that might be a reason why you don't want to store it in Teams, because Teams is a structure that has been defined maybe by somebody else, and you're not comfortable with that. So that might be a reason. To me, it's not a good reason, but it might be a reason why people are storing documents in OneDrive. So you need to understand that to better communicate with people and find maybe the right compromise when you build a Teams environment. And sometimes people need to get their own structure because they will find the document faster than if they have a structure they don't understand. So those are the main reasons I've seen why people are using OneDrive instead of Teams. So now, why to move your document, which was initially in OneDrive, to a team? When you need people to contribute and co-author on documents with you, it's really better to share it in Teams. You can do that in OneDrive, but you don't have, then the conversation you're going to have around the document will be through email. So it's not going to be easy to manage. And in Teams, it's going to be, transparent. You will have all the tools, all the context, you have the conversation. You might have extra information like tabs that will bring more value around your collaboration. Obviously, you're using Teams definitely when you don't want to be buried around email, back and forth email that are not accessible to people coming in the conversation later, or won't see all the conversation. And it's more transparent. It's there. You can search. It's already contextualized to the topic you're talking about, so the channel. So it's way more powerful than email. You can share the document because you feel comfortable sharing the document, even if it's not finished, because you feel safe. You feel that brings value, and there's more benefits than risks that sharing this document. So sometimes people feel there's risk to share documents because what they're sharing is what they produced. So might be some people who judge how you build your documents, especially in draft mode. That's why in Teams it's so important to make people safe about sharing, even if it's not if it's ongoing documents. And also, you share it in Teams for awareness purpose. You want people to know that this document exists. Either it's because within the context of the team, the document is useful. Maybe you might have finished to work on it or not, but the information to have access to this document can help the team. So that's another reason why you will put your document in Teams. And again, when you have to work on a document with several people for a period of time, that's definitely the best way to share this document. It's not in your OneDrive, it's not in SharePoint, it's really in Teams because you have access to all the knowledge of your peers, the team members that can help you to build the document, comment the document. This is really powerful. It's not only you can co-author the document in real time all together, and without locking the document and waiting for somebody to release the document. That's one thing, but also people, if they don't want to modify your document. They can have access to the document and add comments saying, "Oh, this slide I will maybe change the wording a little bit," and they can add all those comments at mention you, so you will get notified that there's a comment and you can revise the document. So once again, it's the best way to collaborate. So why would you move a OneDrive or team document in SharePoint? So to me, you can have a lot of discussion around that. I know that some people don't think the same way I think, but to me, it's really trying to simplify the positioning of when to use what tools and in what context. I will recommend that. I will recommend that the trigger to me is the document is final. I'm not working on it anymore. So now I can share it more broadly with a wider audience, either a department, either the global organization. So when you feel this document is not alive anymore, then you can share it in SharePoint. And usefully, when you do that, you put your document in read-only. So people won't alter the document because it's final. So to me, that's the best practice. That's the easiest way to understand how you work with documents in SharePoint. There's some exceptions, like you need to work on a document and follow process with some approval. So even you could do that in Teams, but it might be confusing for Teams member who don't have the knowledge on how to do that. So it's probably better to do it in SharePoint, but you lose the conversational piece of it. So that might be a reason why you store your document in SharePoint to, trigger some workflows around. Also, when you have to manage complex permissions, you want to allow a group of people to change document, other not just to read it. If you have a different set of permissions, then you can use SharePoint to do that. But once again, it's become more and more complex, so I think it will just target a few people who have the knowledge on how to manage permissions. Quite frankly, the permission management in SharePoint caused the lack of love to SharePoint, at least for end users, because it was a nightmare. It breaks inheritance permissions, so it's really complicated to manage. You really to be really knowledgeable to understand how to manage permission in SharePoint. But there's some needs there. And finally, you feel this document is an asset for your organization, so you need to share it in SharePoint, either in the communication side or either in the team side, and set the appropriate permissions. So I often also have the question, okay, we understand Teams is a central piece of collaboration, but where should we start? What kind of team should we start with? So here are this different schools, again, of thought. There are some customers who are in the Wild West mode, meaning we open Teams to anybody who wants to create a team. So we foster, engagement, collaboration at its maximum, because we feel that we want to empower users. They're the one who have the best idea. They're the one who knows what they can do. So it's really for an environment which fosters trust a lot. So it's really a matter of culture. There are some drawbacks, because you can have a lot of teams created for just test driving teams, and you might have a lot of teams after a while, and some are not really accurate. There might be some duplicates. So there might be some issues also if you have some compliancy constraint. You don't want people to create teams without knowing what is the compliance. You don't want to expose your documents to external access if you don't have the right to do that, if it's not compliant to you. So it depends on the culture and the compliance of the culture of the organization. So there's several factors depending on where you are, what is your context, and what is the right path for you. So I'm not going to dig into that. It's a matter of discussion during governance workshops. But here are a few simple use cases for teams where you can start with a great success. So first one is definitely when you have a new project, you want to create a new project about whatever subject, in whatever department, in whatever area, for whatever team. This is the best way to manage projects, is to use the teams, because you're gonna, during a project, you have a lot of conversation, you have a lot of documents, you might have other context information that coming from different resources. So starting with new project, you might not want to bring a SharePoint site or another environment to Teams because you already started. That might be complicated to transition people from what they were doing in this environment to the new environment. So try to start with a new blank project and educate end user how to use Teams within this project. That's where I see the fastest adoption. Then you have a team. It might not be a project, and it's a good way to create. To foster discussion, conversations around in the team, and so people can exchange ideas, can share their knowledge, can ask questions within the team. So it's the first one is common interest. The second one is common purpose, and the third one, it's a little bit like a project, but might not be a project per se. When you have a common interest, whatever it is, you can identify pretty quickly who are going to be the team members on this common interest, and you can start to share documents information. A good example is what I recommend for every customer is to have a team dedicated to end user support. So their interest is to better understand how Teams is working. So then you can have a team dedicated for that, where people can ask questions. The help desk, the IT team, and the champions, and also other user can answer questions, and and maybe champions can share tips and tricks, documents, guides, videos, how to better use Teams, and so on. So I will start with those three kind of team because it's easier. But I put a link made by a great integrator who's selling a tool around how to manage your teams with templates and pre-build your teams, so you will go faster deploying teams. And they identified a lot of use cases that are really interesting to look at. So I'm going to finish this with the transition. You're starting from an environment where your documents were stored somewhere and you're transitioning uh, to Microsoft 365. So this is going to be an example that might not apply to all of you, but it can give you some ideas once again, and to understand, to help end users to understand where their files are going during the migration process. There can be several strategies to migrate. Basically, there are three. Uh, a little bit can be a little bit more, but basically there's uh, the end user migrate their documents because they know what's important and where they want to put them. The second one is on the other side of the spectrum. There's the IT is migrating everything because there are tools to migrate documents, and in between it's somehow the end user for some documents and the IT department to automate the rest, depending on several factors. But that's not the point. The point is usually what I've seen with most of my customers, they still have network drive file shares, and sometimes they have SharePoint site. Mainly that's where the documents are stored. The SharePoint on-premise SharePoint site documents. So what I've seen is the network drive, usually they're used to store personal documents. Sometimes they call it my documents. Sometimes it's mimic the desktop my documents, so it's automatically backing up personal document into the network drive. So that's gonna go to OneDrive. That's simple, not rocket science. To explain to the end user, okay, you had your personal documents stored in our network drive, now it's going to go into OneDrive. Same thing. With better experience for sure. Then they have network drive with documents that are shared. So some are shared within a project. Some are, I've seen folder where people or everybody had access to the folder because they didn't want to manage permission, so they gave a folder with where everybody has access and just drop the document so they ensure that everybody can have access to the document. I call that public folder. So usually those documents are living documents. So that's project documents, living documents. They are aimed to go to teams because you still want to work around those documents. And sometimes you have folder per department, and then let's say if they're not living documents, it's just you want to store those documents in a folder so everybody can have access to the latest policy, to the latest final document. So you store it in the network drive for department folder, in the department folder. And sometimes you have the same thing on the SharePoint side with SharePoint per department with the final document. So that's gonna move to SharePoint online. So there's my documents, living documents, and different final documents coming from different sources. Sometimes there are also other way to store documents like, Box or other provider. But I think it's a simple framework to understand for end user, and showing them also that you can have access to the documents. What is the benefit of transitioning to their network drive, the file shares, or SharePoint on-prem to OneDrive Teams or SharePoint? First, they have access from any device, computer, smartphone, an iPhone, an iPad, and tablet. and also from a browser. So that's one thing. So it gives autonomy to access all the time whatever document, what we call atawed, anytime, anywhere, any device. Um, Also, they can co-author documents, which is a big pain when you have a network drive because it locks a document by the person who opens the document, so it can be a nightmare. Also, you can sync the documents, and I think it's important to precise here that when you're syncing documents with what Microsoft called the OneDrive sync client, OneDrive sync client syncs not only OneDrive but Teams and SharePoint documents. So what you need to understand, because a lot of customers are afraid of allowing that, actually when you sync, if you um, apply an on-demand sync, and I will highly suggest to apply that, actually you don't sync the documents. You sync your ability to navigate into the folder, and when you click on the document, then it downloads the document. You can say, okay, I know that I'm going to take a plane, so I want to synchronize manually those documents and force them to stay on my computer. So you can still really sync, but usually what happens, and the best way to work with documents is to use a sync client so you can navigate in Windows Explorer as usual, because it's more handy to copy a document from a folder to another. It's a well-known experience, and you need to understand it won't take place. It won't take a lot of place on your hard drive, because unless you say here are the files I really want to be on my computer, you will only sync them when you open the document. And if you open a lot of documents and it takes a lot of place, you also need to know that after a while, those documents, if you don't use them, they will be released to the cloud and it will free space on your computer. And you finally you can manually say free some space, and it will do that for you. So you always have your document accessible from anywhere. They're always current. You don't you don't have several versions of the document. You have one way to access one place to access your document. You can see different versions of the document if you want to go back to the previous version. So it's really, and it's secure if you implement MFA when you're accessing outside of your network. It avoids the problem of computer crashing and you lose all your documents, or if there's a malware that that you know that change your document. You can because it's in the cloud, you can um, go back to the previous version, so you can restore a version of a document. So it's really the best way to manage documents. And I think this infographic is pretty helpful for end users. That's what I've seen, to better understand not only what are the benefits, but what is the path of this transition. So that was the end of the when to use what positioning. It might be simple, but sometimes simple things are better to understand at first, and then you can go into more details, more options, because one size does not fit all. We all know that. But at least if you start to explain things simply, that will help people to get into the process of learning, and then you can add more complex learning after a while.